Welcome to the Claire Horatio Daily World Brief. Today is Tuesday, August 4, 2026. And the mission for this briefing is to examine the widened gap between detached, high-level policy decisions and the stark, on-the-ground realities that civilians are facing globally. We are looking at a, frankly, chaotic mix of developments, starting right now in the U.S., where a coalition of 25 states is actively suing the Trump administration over a sweeping new set of global tariffs. And simultaneously, the president is publicly demanding that oil giants like Chevron and Exxon slash retail prices.
Yeah, the domestic economic clash in the U.S. right now it provides a perfect lens into that exact friction. You have this mix of Democratic and Republican-led states launching a massive lawsuit to block these new 10 to 12.5% tariffs. These are being invoked under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, which, well, it gives the president broad authority to enforce trade agreements.
But these specific tariffs affect a staggering 99% of all U.S. imports. And the White House is claiming this blanket policy targets imports produced by forced labor. If the Supreme Court just rejected a highly similar tariff framework back in February, isn't this administration basically just slapping a new anti-forced labor label on a rejected prescription and hoping the pharmacy fills it anyway?
That is precisely the argument the states are making in court. I mean, they are arguing that this is merely a pretext to bypass the legislature and illegally raise taxes. The underlying civic and governance stakes here are immense, because foreign policy friction instantly translates into domestic inflation.
Especially considering Chevron and ExxonMobil just made a combined $26 billion in second quarter profits, stemming directly from the energy disruption of the U.S. war on Iran.
Exactly. So the administration is attempting a highly contradictory dual strategy here. On one hand, they're utilizing these blanket tariffs as geopolitical leverage. On the other hand, the president is heavily criticizing those oil giants, demanding they cut consumer prices. When Brent crude soared to $126 a barrel earlier this year, it aggressively squeezed household budgets.
So they are trying to mandate lower pump prices through executive pressure to mitigate voter anger ahead of the November midterms, while simultaneously enacting trade barriers that inherently raise the baseline cost of nearly all imported consumer goods.
Right. It's an attempt to artificially insulate voters from the mathematical consequences of a global trade and military conflict. It's completely unsustainable.
And that kind of top-down domestic posturing drains the lifeblood from global safety nets, too. When we pivot to the international consequences of U.S. policy decisions, the data presented at the AIDS 2026 conference reveals a catastrophic shift. Donor funding for the global HIV response plunged 25% in 2025, driven entirely by U.S. cuts to the PEPFAR program during the second Trump administration.
And for context, PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, has been one of the most successful global health initiatives in history. I mean, it has saved over 26 million lives since 2003. It relies entirely on sustained, predictable funding to maintain a massive supply chain of antiretroviral drugs.
Which is why, globally, 77,000 fewer children receive treatment, representing a 14% drop in just 1 year. And South Africa experienced a staggering 45% decline. Adding insult to injury, a senior U.S. State Department official at the conference presented an AI-generated map that completely scrambled and mislabeled the names of African nations. But if African nations are acutely aware of these U.S. cuts, why can't they simply bridge the financial gap themselves?
Well, the structural barrier preventing them from doing that is crippling sovereign debt. Many of these hard-hit countries simply don't have the financial liquidity to replace the sheer scale of international financing. You're looking at nations dedicating massive portions of their gross domestic product simply to service the interest on international loans.
Treating a continent of 54 sovereign nations as a monolithic abstraction, literally an AI-generated blur, ignores the fact that interrupted funding streams translate directly and instantly to a spike in new HIV acquisitions and pediatric deaths.
Yeah, the mathematics of a viral pandemic are entirely unforgiving. Retreating from that commitment treats the lives of citizens relying on these daily medications as, just disposable data points on a budget spreadsheet.
We see that same dangerous abstraction playing out on the modern battlefield. Recent escalations show Ukrainian drones striking Russian logistics hubs run by the retailer Wildberries near Moscow and St. Petersburg, killing 5. Meanwhile, in Kherson, a Russian drone was filmed actively hunting an unarmed civilian market vendor. And on the policy side of warfare, the UK Ministry of Defense has awarded a roughly $2.6 billion, or about £2 billion contract to a tech company called Skyroll to build digital twin virtual reality environments modeling real cities like Riga, Latvia, to train soldiers. And quickly, for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, you can always visit clarinetratio.com. But looking at this VR contract, it sounds like we were paying billions for what developers call Fortnite on steroids to train soldiers on second-order consequences of war, like power grid failures. While actual autonomous drones are chasing people through the streets, can these sanitized algorithms ever truly capture the unpredictable horror of combat?
It's highly doubtful. I mean, the enthusiasm for robotized warfare and these high-level digital simulations demands intense civic skepticism. The concept of a digital twin involves creating a highly detailed virtual replica of a physical city, integrating data on infrastructure and population density. And sure, knowing where a population might shelter if a water plant is destroyed is tactically useful.
But using a civilian e-commerce hub like Wildberries to move military supplies proves that civilian logistics and military supply chains are now completely indistinguishable targets.
Exactly. Treating civilian populations as predictable, programmable data points within a simulation strips away the chaotic reality of war. The footage from Kherson of an autonomous drone detonating next to a fleeing civilian shows that the rules of engagement are eroding in real time.
And while militaries are trying to model human behavior in these simulated crises, climate change is forcing vulnerable populations to adapt in real time, completely unprotected by any safety net. In India's Delhi region, 5 million informal workers face impossible daily choices between starvation and heat stroke, costing India an estimated 2% of its GDP.
Because heat is no longer just an environmental metric, It has become a profound labor crisis. Informal workers, street vendors, construction laborers, they lack basic protections. There's no paid time off, no occupational safety standards enforcing cooling breaks.
South Korea just reported 16 deaths amid a historic 42.5 degrees Celsius heat wave, which is 108.5 degrees Fahrenheit. In the U.S., a 37-year-old man was just arrested for arson connected to the devastating Washington state wildfires that forced 60,000 people to evacuate. But going back to those workers in Delhi, they are returning to unventilated concrete jungles without power for cooling. If the workforce literally cannot sleep or recover overnight, at what point does the city's economic engine just seize up entirely?
It seizes up when the physical limits of the human body are reached, which we are seeing happen right now. The cascading effects are severe, and women bear a vastly disproportionate burden during these extreme climate events. When extreme heat forces schools to close, the unpaid caregiving responsibilities fall overwhelmingly on women, forcing them to sacrifice their daily wages to stay in those unventilated concrete structures.
This kind of intense environmental and economic pressure inevitably pushes civic institutions to their breaking points, testing the social contract. In the UK, Prime Minister Andy Burnham is being forced to release prisoners early due to severe capacity limits in the justice system. Simultaneously, he is facing pressure to implement a nearly $25 billion or £19 billion windfall tax on banks like HSBC to fund a cost-of-living agenda. If the UK government is desperately relying on the financial sector to stimulate national growth, isn't levying a massive 38% windfall tax akin to selling your car's engine to pay for new tires?
It absolutely carries deep structural risks. A windfall tax is a one-off levy imposed on a sector that has experienced a massive surge in profits in this case, banks profiting from high central bank interest rates. Advocacy groups argue that extraction is necessary to help citizens crushed by the cost of living crisis, but it is fundamentally a form of civic rationing.
We are seeing institutional triage elsewhere too. In South Africa, a crushing 30% unemployment rate has fueled aggressive anti-migrant protests. Legal migrants from Nigeria and Ghana are being forced to abandon their businesses and flee the country entirely.
Right, because whether a government is rationing physical prison space in a neglected justice system like in the UK, or citizens are rationing perceived economic opportunity in South Africa, the result is the same. When a government exhibits systemic failures in providing jobs and basic stability, the resulting public desperation leads directly to the violent scapegoating of legal migrants,
which fractures diplomatic relations across the continent. That desperation for economic opportunity brings us to India, where the promised engine of growth is systematically failing the generation meant to inherit it. Following the resignation of the education minister over repeated exam leaks, Data reveals that 67% of graduates in 2023 were unemployed, which is a massive jump from 13% in 1983.
Yeah, this represents the terrifying prospect of India's long-anticipated demographic dividend turning into a demographic disaster. Historically, countries leverage a massive working-age population to drive rapid economic expansion. But India's economy has stagnant manufacturing growth. They relied on the IT and services sectors to build their middle class.
And now that traditional middle-class escape hatch is stalling, with Goldman Sachs estimating AI could replace up to 12% of non-farm jobs in the country. When a society promises that a degree equals a stable life and that social contract breaks down completely, it generates explosive political anger. How does a government manage 360 million young people who realize they may have a lower standard of living than their parents?
It's an incredibly dangerous situation. Compounding this structural bottleneck is an educational system deeply misaligned with the actual skills required by an AI-integrated labor market. When a nation's youth comprehensively lose faith in the legitimacy of their own institutions, whether through systemic corruption like those exam leaks or the sudden evaporation of promised jobs, it poses a massive civic threat.
It's the ultimate failure of civic planning colliding with technological disruption.
Exactly. And if you look closely at all the developments we covered as of the episode date, a really stark core pattern emerges. I mean, consider the U.S. slashing vital global health funding, or militaries building sanitized digital twins to map war zones, or governments ignoring the realities of extreme heat and youth unemployment.
The common denominator seems to be an institutional detachment from human consequences.
Yes. The shared danger is treating human lives as lines on a spreadsheet. When powerful systems abstract away the raw human element of their policies, the real-world consequences on the ground are always swift, brutal, and unforgiving. The lingering question for all of us is how long a society can endure that strain before the real people behind those data points demand a reckoning.
It's a question every major institution will have to answer. Thank you for joining us for today's briefing. For more daily world briefs and classic audiobooks, please visit clarineratio.com.